1% of dudes rapping, they ain't nice as me. 98% ain't live the same type of life as me. The judge gave me life and then they sent me where the life is be. That level 4 with depth and vice, the type of stuff they like to see. Two choices, fight or flee. I refuse to die a chump. I never been a mark, but damn, it's scary when that riot jump. I seen dudes cry, get pumped, and some sexually brutalized. Knew a dude who lost his life and he was only doing 5 year-long racial fights when homie all you do is ride. Lonely days and nights up in a hole causing suicide. From the moment you arrive, you see the Mexican mafia, AB skinheads with big giant swastikas, pro-black philosophers, the BGF, the Kumi, and Muslims who will murk you from the nation to the Sunni. That MS was loony, quick to ride up on they rival. Even Christians went to church, hide knives up in they Bible. Political and tribal, the Crips and Damus, the Long Beach, the Hubs and the Dubs and the Grooves, the IE, the Bakersfield, the Dago Pyrus, the hustlers quick to roll, the gangsters gon' move, whatever click you choose.
Say, what's cracking, YouTube? It's your boy 16 to Life, and I'm back like I'm on a parole violation. Yard down. Now, for those of y'all that's new to my page, in 1994, I got arrested. I was eventually sentenced to 16 years plus life, and I served 24 years straight in the California prison system. Yeah, that's me gassing right there on that intro. And if you want to get that song, hit me up on my email, 16tolifemusic@gmail.com, and I'm going to give you the information to get it. And so today I'm going to be doing a reaction to a video talking about an individual whose name I would hear often spoke in prison. I never ran across this individual. Nevertheless, his name would be spoke in many different circles at many different prisons by friends and foes alike. So let's get into a reaction about a gang member known as Big Evil.
According to one detective, Cleman Big Evil Johnson is, quote, the most cold-blooded killer in the entire city. You see, Violet Loggins endured a devastating loss. Her husband, Donald Ray Loggins, was murdered, leaving a hole in her life that could never be filled. Donald had been a devoted family man, dependable, hardworking, and always there when he was needed. Every day, without fail, he would return home by 2:45 p.m. to care for their baby, so Violet could prepare for her evening shift at work. But on August 5th, 1991, Donald was late. Violet sat anxiously, checking the clock and looking at the phone, unease growing with every passing minute. Something was wrong. She could feel it. If Violet had stepped outside at 2:30 p.m., she might have heard the gunshots that shattered her world. That afternoon, her husband and his friend, Peyton Baroit, were gunned down at a car wash by orders of a gang leader named Cleman Johnson. The command came from just 100 feet away as Johnson sat on his parents' porch, plotting violence that would leave two families broken. The crime was as senseless as it was brutal. Donald and his friend were targeted simply because they lived on the east side of Central Avenue, a boundary dividing Crips and Bloods territory. Cleman Johnson, already a rising force in the gang world, set up the murders to give a new recruit, a young blood eager to prove his loyalty, a chance to earn his stripes. For Violet, the loss was unbearable. Donald had been a kind-hearted man who loved his family and was always willing to help others. Now he was gone, leaving her to raise their child alone. My husband was a good man, she said. He was always helping people. Now my son has to grow up without a father. All I have are pictures. What am I supposed to tell him? To this day, many of the victims' families, including Violet, struggle to make sense of their loss. Some don't even know the real name of the man responsible, but they know his street name. And it's one that stirs equal parts fear and fury. Big Evil.
Now, even though I'm not from Los Angeles, the city that I'm from is probably like about an hour and 30 minutes east of Los Angeles. Though when I got to prison in 1996, sometimes just sitting, you're sitting around Bloods, you're sitting around Crips, and you hear people telling war stories. And this is one of the names that I heard often, in several different pens. Like I said, at times dudes will go to talking and they'll talk about this dude, Big Evil, and the chaos and the mayhem that was attached to his name. He definitely was an individual who had a certain area of Los Angeles terrified by some, respected by others, hated by others. He definitely was a name that I heard often being discussed by different gang members, Crips and Bloods, enemies and friends alike.
This is the story of how a young boy named Cleman Johnson became one of Los Angeles' most notorious gang leaders, known as Big Evil. Cleman Big Evil Johnson was a name that struck fear into the hearts of many in Los Angeles. Remember the detective who once described him as the most cold-blooded killer in the entire city? Well, there was definitely a reason for that description. But before he became a notorious figure in the streets of South Central, Cleman Damone Johnson was just a boy, born on October 15th, 1967, into a world that seemed far removed from the chaos that would eventually consume it. Raised in a modest 3-bedroom home on 88th Street, Cleman grew up in what could have been mistaken for an idyllic childhood. His parents, Aileen and Cleman Johnson, were loving and attentive, striving to provide a stable life for their 5 sons. Their White House had a big backyard with a pigeon coop, a haven where Cleman and his brothers spent hours playing with friends from the neighborhood. On warm summer days, Aileen would hand out Kool-Aid to the loud group of boys, sometimes inviting them to dinner, where the family of 7 always said grace before they ate. Cleman was a sweet, helpful child, known for his politeness and eagerness to lend a hand. He earned a reputation as the neighborhood helper, often carrying groceries for neighbors or assisting with odd jobs. As a Boy Scout, he earned a string of badges, including one for survival, a skill he would unknowingly rely on later in life. Though his parents were strict, Cleman didn't hate their discipline. He loved the family camping trips to places like Crater Lake in Oregon, where he marveled at the serenity of nature, far from the grit of Los Angeles. But South Central Los Angeles in the early 1970s was changing. The neighborhood Cleman grew up in, once a tight-knit community where disputes were settled with fists, was slowly being consumed by the rise of gang culture. The formation of the Crips in 1970 unleashed a wave of violence that transformed the city. Once known as the City of Angels, Los Angeles earned a grimmer title, the gang capital of America. In response to the Crips' growing influence, rival groups like the Piru, Bounty Hunters, and Swans banded together to form the Bloods, igniting a rivalry that would shape the lives of countless young men in the area, including Cleman. By the time Cleman was 8 years old, the violence had reached his doorstep.
Now, some people out there might be wondering, if you have all this going on in the neighborhood, how did his parents not see him getting caught up in this type of stuff and joining the gang, so on and so forth? Well, let's keep in mind, or if you paid attention, you heard that Cleman was born in 1967. The Crips started in 1970. So let's just say Cleman's parents, because I believe they mentioned he had several brothers and sisters. I think it was 7. I could be incorrect, but let's just say his parents was 30 years old by the time Big Evil or Cleman was born. And then by the time the Crips started, his parents are well past the age of understanding what's going on. And then we have to realize that this is something new at that point in time. It's different for mothers and fathers today who are aware of the Crips and Bloods, but this was an entirely new dynamic. So for something to happen back then that was foreign to them, it's a little hard for any of those parents who had children who were either first generation Crips or Bloods to really have an idea what was coming. Because when the neighborhood is cool, you just see that as the neighborhood being cool. You have no idea the Crips and Bloods was getting ready to turn into something so horrific.
One afternoon, while sitting on a fire hydrant, he witnessed a group of teenagers open fire on his friend Daryl. The sight of Daryl's lifeless body on the pavement was a turning point for Cleman. The trauma of that moment exposed him to a brutal reality, one that no child should ever have to face. Despite the growing turmoil, Cleman's parents worked hard to keep their family grounded. They shielded their children as best they could from the chaos outside their door, but the gang culture was inescapable. By the time Cleman entered middle school, Crips members were a common presence at Drew Middle School. The once innocent boy who had spent summers playing in the backyard began to change. It was in the 7th grade that Cleman experienced another pivotal moment. When a larger boy from the kitchen Crips tried to intimidate him, Cleman fought back. His peers watched as he stood his ground, and for the first time, Cleman felt the intoxicating rush of power and respect. That day, he earned a reputation. It was a small victory, but it planted the seed of what was to come. From a once sweet, helpful child to a feared figure in South Central, The path he chose that day would ultimately lead to his downfall. As Kleeman's ties to the 89 family Bloods deepened, his family fought desperately to steer him toward a better path. They poured their love and guidance into him, but the gang's influence was a relentless force, pulling him deeper into a world of violence and crime. Johnson quickly rose through the ranks, earning respect for his brutal fighting skills and unrelenting aggression. His half-brother, Ricky Parker, described him as a ruthless and highly skilled fighter, a reputation that preceded him on the streets. Even rival gang members acknowledged his abilities. A member of the Kitchen Crips once remarked that Big Evil could take down opponents with his bare hands. Yet, as gun violence began to dominate Los Angeles, even the toughest fighters adapted to the times. Johnson, who had built his reputation with his fists, adopted firearms to protect himself and his territory. He then formed an elite crew known as the 88 Monsters, a group of loyal enforcers dedicated to defending their turf with violence. This obsession with power consumed him, and his name became known with terror. A member of the Swans gang described Johnson's fury, saying, "When he gets angry, you better watch out. He's like a hurricane, unstoppable. When he says something, people get hurt." Under Johnson's leadership, the 89 Family Bloods became one of the most violent gangs in Los Angeles.
Now, once again, even though I'm not from Los Angeles, being in prison, being around many gang members, you hear a lot of talks, right? And this particular hood that he was from, this neighborhood, 89 Family Swans, they are surrounded. They are positioned in an area where they are pretty much surrounded on all sides by Crips. And so back in the 80s, California gangbanging was definitely different, you know. Not to say that it's not deadly and violent now, but back then, before all the cameras, before all the cell phones, and just the attitude of these gang members was just off the chain. And so I've heard many stories of how fierce this one particular neighborhood was. Regardless of the fact that they were surrounded by enemies on all sides, they definitely was a very, very active blood gang.
Their territory was small but fiercely contested, surrounded by larger and more powerful rivals. This constant battle for survival created a brutal culture within the gang, where violence was not just a means of protection, but a way of life. By the early 1990s, the area controlled by the 89 Family Bloods, Johnson's stronghold, was one of the deadliest neighborhoods in California. In 1993 alone, 12 murders were recorded within this small section of South Central Los Angeles. While Johnson was not responsible for every act of violence, his influence as a key player in the escalating bloodshed could not be denied. Detective Rosemary Sanchez of the LAPD described Johnson as one of the most violent individuals she had ever encountered. FBI agent John Lipsky even compared him to Tony Spilotro, the notorious mafia enforcer, noting that Johnson had personally confessed to killing 13 people. By any definition, this made him a serial killer. Even if Johnson's self-reported body count was on the lower end, it placed him on par with infamous killers like the Freeway Killer and the Night Stalker. His victims were often young gang members or innocent bystanders trapped in a cycle of violence that defined life in South Central Los Angeles. While some argued that Johnson's environment shaped his violent tendencies, his choices ultimately drove him to take lives. Detective Thomas Matthew, who viewed himself as Johnson's nemesis, called him one of the most cold-blooded killers in the city. He noted that the 89 Family Bloods were infamous for their swift retaliation, often striking back within hours of an attack. But Johnson wasn't just a brute, he was calculating. Unlike many gang members who acted impulsively, Johnson planned his attacks with precision. He became known for his ability to evade capture, even managing to set up hits from behind bars. His reputation for bold, well-executed violence grew, and one incident stood out as a testament to his audacity. In a coordinated attack on the Avalon Gardens housing project, Johnson devised a plan to divert police attention. He orchestrated 2 separate shootings in different parts of the city before leading a group of 10 gang members on a brazen assault. Over 200 rounds were fired into the project, creating chaos and destruction. Miraculously, only one person died in the attack. Despite his notoriety, Johnson's mother struggled to reconcile the man her son had become with the boy she had raised. She questioned what had gone wrong, wondering how he had turned to a life of violence despite her best efforts to guide him.
Now, that's a question that a lot of people often have, especially individuals who don't have family members in gangs and they are from the outside looking in. And, I said often that these individuals, myself included, who happen to grow up and join gangs, you don't necessarily see yourself joining a gang for the most part, because a large number of individuals who are in this gang with you, if not all of them, have been lifelong friends. And so it's really just, you guys are just transitioning from one phase of life to another phase of life. And when you've been knowing an individual since you guys have been 3-4 years old, going to school together, going to church, playing little league baseball and basketball, swimming pool in the summertime, spending the night at each other's houses and things like that, when you happen to get to the age of 16, 17, 18, whatever it may be, and then that one friend that you've been knowing all your life gets killed, it's almost like losing a family member. And so if you happen to be with a collective who doesn't believe in going to the police, who believes riding and getting revenge for your friend, that's just what it is. And so it's hard to explain to an individual who may not be involved in it. But if you are involved in it, that's something that you pretty much are obligated to do, or at least you feel you're obligated to do, due to the relationship that you've had with your friend who just lost his life.
Even those who knew Johnson personally found him to be a paradox. Detective Matthew described him as a charming, intelligent man who could easily win people over. But beneath the surface, he was a cold-blooded killer capable of extraordinary violence, to the extent he even put a hit out on Matthew himself. The threat was so serious that Matthew required a SWAT team escort for protection. Fear of retaliation kept witnesses silent, making it nearly impossible to bring Johnson to justice. However, in the end, prosecutors found 3 bold witnesses willing to testify against him. Their testimony linked Johnson to the 1991 murders of 2 rival gang members, ultimately leading to his conviction. In 1994, a specialized task force was created with one mission: to take down Big Evil and his gang. The team, made up of detectives, FBI agents, and prosecutors, set their sights on dismantling the 89 family. But they faced an enormous obstacle: fear. Big Evil's reputation for brutality and his ability to avoid justice made him a figure of terror, and no one dared to step forward. This fear wasn't unfounded. Early in the investigation, it became clear how deadly speaking out against Big Evil could be. Gloria Lyons, one of the few brave enough to testify against the 89 family, was murdered in cold blood. Soon after, another witness met the same fate. These deaths sent a chilling message to anyone even considering helping law enforcement. The 89 Family Bloods, a gang with roughly 80 members, was responsible for more than 60 murders in the span of a decade.
And that's the thing, right? A lot of times when you do have information that can help the police prosecute gang members from whatever area they're from, a lot of times it's because you are close to that area. You live in that area. And so you know these individuals, but these individuals know you as well. And at some point in time, when you cooperate in a police investigation and you give information regarding a shooting or someone loses their life, at some point in time, when charges are filed against the individual that you have chose to testify against, the individual, in according to law, has a right to face his accuser, and there's something that's known as discovery, which is the prosecution has to hand over basically the evidence from the case that he has against you to your lawyer, so you are able to fight this case. And then that's when you learn the names of these informants, these people telling, whether they call we tip or whatever. Once they do an investigation with the police and make a statement and become a witness, then their name becomes part of this investigation. Eventually the gang members find out about it, and if you're living in the hood, it's gonna be all bad.
Their territory, a mere quarter of a square mile between Central and Manchester Avenues, Avalon Boulevard and 92nd Street, was a war zone with a homicide rate 9 times higher than the rest of the city. Big Evil stood at the center of it all, an undisputed kingpin who ruled through fear and violence. However, A breakthrough in the case finally came when 3 key witnesses, facing their own legal troubles, agreed to testify. Their testimonies revealed critical details about the murders of Loggins and Beroit. One of the witnesses, Freddie Jelks, a member of the 89 family, claimed to have seen Big Evil hand an Uzi to Michael Fat Rat Allen, the weapon later used in the fatal shooting.
Now, that's what I was just talking about earlier. One of these individuals who is testifying was part of the gang. And so that's how he is privy to certain information. Because a lot of times back in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, before all these cameras, when these shootings and drive-bys was going on, maybe or may not, the individual that you were shooting it at did not recognize you or did not know who you was. He may have went to school with you, but when dudes are caught up in this type of lifestyle and they are sticking to the code, sometimes it's gonna have to be an individual from your collective so to give police information. Now, this individual was a part of this gang, and had he not been caught up facing murder charges himself, then he would have not cooperated. But due to the fact that he was trying to free himself from a situation that he got into, he chose to give information on Big Evil.
At trial, prosecutors painted a grim portrait of Big Evil, describing him as a ruthless predator. Yet, in a striking contrast, some community members offered a different view. They remembered him as someone who could be kind and generous. One teenager shared a story of how Big Evil had helped his mother recover a stolen purse. It was a small act of decency, but it stood in stark contrast to the havoc he caused as the leader of the 89 family. Detective Matthew explained that the fear Big Evil instilled often silenced those with negative stories to tell. But while some residents viewed him as an occasional protector, many couldn't ignore the violence and chaos that followed him and his gang. The shootings, murders, and intimidation tactics were an inescapable part of life in the neighborhood. During the trial, prosecutor Jennifer Lentz Snyder played an audio recording of a phone call between Big Evil and another gang member. In the recording, Big Evil ordered a hit on Detective Matthew. What made the moment even more chilling was Big Evil's taunting imitation of Matthew's imagined reaction to the threat, followed by his signature maniacal laugh. Detective Matthew revealed that Big Evil had no problem about bragging directly to him about his crimes, including the murders he committed. This lack of remorse and his brazen attitude made him one of the most dangerous figures Matthew had ever encountered. Despite his terrible acts, Big Evil's parents remained steadfast in their support, attending his trial every day.
Now, you may have some people out there who's going to say, okay, well, when your son is accused of all these horrific crimes, why do you continue to support him? Well, I can speak for individuals in my generation, right? When we was out there on the block doing whatever we was doing, when we saw our parents, the homies' parents, the pastor, the teacher, the people that we was raised around, we would take our hats off. We would get together, basically. We put the beer away, the drugs, whatever we was doing. And we would try to give the appearance that we were the same individuals they had been knowing all their lives. So, when you get arrested, when I got arrested for the crime that I was arrested for, many of my friends' mothers was like, oh, wow, I can't believe that. He's always so nice. He's always so polite when he comes over here. And the same when my mom would hear about certain things some of my friends was doing. They just couldn't believe it because it was like we was almost two different individuals. We was a different type of person around our family, friends, and loved ones. And then once we got out in the street, we was a different type of person to try to become who we felt we had to become in those streets. So it's not like we're running around cussing, selling drugs, and acting crazy in front of our parents like you might see some of these so-called YNs today. We really had respect for our family, our loved ones, the mothers of our friends, and things of that nature.
They refused to believe the media's portrayal of their son and questioned the accuracy of the charges against him. Ricky Parker, Big Evil's older half-brother, shared insight into the man behind the nickname. He admitted his brother's incredible fighting skills and his quick rise within the gang. But Parker also believed that Big Evil's reputation for violence ultimately sealed his fate. The police were relentless in their pursuit, and eventually the jury delivered their verdict: death row. Even with his life on the line, Big Evil remained defiant. In a final statement to the police, he declared his disdain for authority and even welcomed the death penalty. To him, it was a form of protection, a way to escape the constant danger of the streets. His life had been marked by relentless violence and countless near-death experiences. Now, with death row ahead of him, Big Evil saw it not as an end, but as a way out. However, in a dramatic turn of events, the Supreme Court overturned Big Evil's conviction. The court found that the trial judge had improperly dismissed a juror who might have leaned toward a not guilty verdict. The case hinged on the testimony of Carl Connor, a key witness who claimed to have seen the murder. However, records showed he was at work when the crime occurred. Connor explained that he and a co-worker frequently swapped shifts, leading to flaws in the time records. Juror 11, skeptical of Connor's explanation, voiced doubts about the credibility of Hispanic witnesses. This comment alarmed the other jurors who suspected Juror 11 had let prejudice rather than evidence influence his judgment. The judge dismissed the juror, citing bias, but the Supreme Court later ruled that the dismissal was unwarranted, as there was insufficient proof of bias. This ruling cast uncertainty over the case's future, leaving the next move to Los Angeles County District Attorney Steve Cooley. At the time, prosecutors believed Big Evil was behind a wave of gang-related murders in the early 1990s. Investigators revisited cases where he had been a suspect, ultimately adding 4 new charges to his indictment. These included the murders of Albert Sutton, Georgia Denise "Niece" Jones, and Tyrone Mosley, as well as the attempted murder of Kim Coleman.
Now that's crazy. Sitting in prison, already charged with several murders, and then they come and add 4 more murders. I mean, that's saying a whole lot right there. And earlier in this documentary, they say that Big Evil admitted to 13 murders. So that's a whole lot of shooting, gang banging, and killing going on, if in fact this is true. Like I said, man, the 90s, the 2000s, the 80s was definitely a different type of time in the gang banging dynamics. One main reason being because there was no cameras, there was no cell phones, there was no people out recording everything that you did. There was no surveillance camera in every other business that's going on down the street. So you had a lot of impromptu violence, and the attitude was different back then because you could catch a dude in the street and shoot at him and have a shootout, and if fate was on your side, you could get away with it.
On September 14, 1991, Big Evil and his gang, the 89 family, launched a brutal attack on a party hosted by the rival 97 East Coast Crips. In a drive-by shooting, gang members sprayed bullets into the crowd, killing Tyrone Mosley and injuring Kim Coleman and Kenneth Davis. A year later, in September 1992, tensions flared between the 89 family and another Crips faction. Albert Sutton, an 89 family member, brought his Crips-affiliated brother to Big Evil's house, where a shootout erupted. Sutton's brother was injured in the crossfire. When Sutton agreed to testify against Big Evil in court, he became a target. Big Evil ordered his cousin, Leon Johnson, to eliminate him. On September 16, 1992, Leon shot Sutton execution style, killing him instantly. In 1994, law enforcement formed a joint task force to dismantle the 89 family. One of their investigations focused on the murder of Willie Bogan, with Niece Jones as the key witness. Jones testified that Charles Lafayette, a member of an allied gang, committed the murder. However, the trial ended in a mistrial, prompting a retrial. 2 days after the mistrial, detectives interviewed Big Evil at Ironwood State Prison. They questioned him about the 89 family's activities, particularly Sutton's murder. Shortly after the interview, Big Evil made a cryptic call to his associate, Recco Wilson, warning him about the ongoing investigation. Big Evil instructed Wilson to watch the smokers, a term prosecutors argued was a veiled order to eliminate witnesses. 1 week later, Niece Jones, one of these smokers, was found murdered. Prosecutors claimed Wilson carried out the hit under Big Evil's orders. Wilson was later convicted of killing Jones and sentenced to life without parole. The task force's years-long investigation ended in a series of trials during the late 1990s. Big Evil was eventually charged with the murders of Sutton, Jones, and Mosley, along with the attempted murder of Kim Coleman. These charges were formally added to his case on May 13, 2014. Prosecutors alleged that Sutton and Jones were killed to silence witnesses and that Big Evil personally inflicted severe injury on Coleman. The charges, which included special circumstances for multiple murders and gang-related enhancements, moved forward. Following a preliminary hearing, formal charges were filed on April 9, 2015. However, in May 2015, Johnson fought to get the new charges and gang enhancements against him dropped. He argued that adding these charges after he had already won an appeal was unfair and violated his rights. Johnson requested a hearing to prove his point and have the charges dismissed. The prosecution opposed Johnson's motion, claiming the new charges weren't meant to punish him further. They argued that they had sought the death penalty in both the original trial and the retrial, so the new charges weren't retaliatory. The court, however, recognized that adding new charges after Johnson's appeal could appear vindictive. These charges introduced the possibility of a harsher sentence, including the death penalty. As a result, the court ordered a hearing to determine if the prosecution had a legitimate reason for bringing the additional charges. In the end, the court sided with the prosecution. The judge determined that the new charges were based on legitimate evidence discovered during their reinvestigation, not as retaliation for Johnson's appeal. As a result, the court declined to dismiss the charges. After serving more than 25 years in prison, Johnson finally became eligible for parole. Once sentenced to death row, he pleaded no contest to a single murder charge in 2023. This plea deal spared him from the death penalty and opened the door for potential parole. Johnson was originally sentenced to death for 2 of the 5 murders he was linked to. However, a judge later ruled that because a lead detective had made racist comments, Johnson would no longer face the death penalty or life without parole. After more than 2 decades behind bars, Johnson pleaded no contest to the murder of Peyton Beroit. As part of the plea agreement, charges related to the killings of Donald Loggins, Albert Sutton, Georgia Jones, and Tyrone Mosley were dismissed.
Now, this is crazy. It just seems like the longer Big Evil stays in jail, the more they charge him with different murders that they allege that he has done. So once again, I said that when I was in prison, regardless of whether it was Salinas Valley, regardless of whether it was Ironwood, North Kern, CMC, I would often hear individuals from the area that he was from, whether they was Crips or Bloods, talk about the heyday of Big Evil. You know, they say a whole lot was going on, and he was definitely an individual not to be trifled with.
Johnson's legal journey had been fraught with controversy and complications. First, the California Supreme Court overturned his conviction because of issues involving a juror. Later, revelations about the lead detective in the case, Brian McCartan, further derailed the prosecution's efforts. McCartan had referred to black gang members using racial slurs, and this information had been hidden from the defense for 4 years. A judge ruled that the delayed disclosure was unfair and significantly damaged the case against Johnson. John Lipsky, an FBI agent who investigated Johnson in the 1990s, expressed disappointment over how the case was handled, describing it as riddled with unfortunate mistakes. While Lipsky acknowledged Johnson's dangerousness, he believed the 25 years to life sentence was a fair outcome given the legal misconduct. Even behind bars, Johnson had been an anomaly in the Los Angeles gang world. He retained control over his gang, ordering murders and orchestrating violence from his prison cell. While he was only convicted of 1 murder by the end of his trial, the damage he caused to the community was immense. On October 30th, 2021, tragedy struck Johnson's family. His son, Clemont Johnson Jr., was fatally shot on the 2800 block of James M. Wood Boulevard in Koreatown. He suffered multiple gunshot wounds and later died at the hospital, marking yet another tragic end. Appreciate you watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.
Now, that's a cold story right there. You know, rest in peace to everybody who lost their lives in those shootings and everything they had going on, you know. And then the end of the story ends with, unfortunately, his son also losing his life. I'm sure you'll have some people out there who believe that, you know, those things are karma, or those are basically deeds passed down from the sin of the father. So I mean, people are gonna feel whatever they feel, you know. It's just a cold, crazy situation. And like I say, once again, even though I never met him, I've heard his name mentioned in a lot of circles when I'm in prison. A lot of times, when I was in prison, excuse me, a lot of times, you know, you do have dudes sitting around telling war stories. You know, you may be sitting here with your homie and you have some dudes that's, you know, from Los Angeles a few feet away. And of course, you know, at times, man, I'm gonna keep it 100. I would pretend like I wasn't listening, but I would be tuned in, because some of these things are intriguing, especially when you hear names over and over. You know, you hear different. The first time you hear it, you might think, okay, a dude just putting a 10 on it, especially if he's talking about one of his homies. He's giving him too much, you know, he's giving him too many accolades, you know, too much props. But then you hear it again, you know, and then you hear it possibly from enemies, dudes who he was battling against, saying, oh yeah, man, you know, that dude used to come through here and give us hell. And I've heard several different names mentioned like that. And like I said, once you hear it over and over and over from different sources, it's definitely intriguing. Anyway, you already know what it is. It's your boy 16 of Life. Resume normal program.